Welcome to First Bite, our midweek Detroit Lions podcast here for prideofdetroit.com. It is 2 weeks until the NFL draft. I can't believe it's already here. It seems like we've only been arguing over the same prospects for 8 straight months instead of the normal 3. But anyways, my name is Jeremy Reisman. I'm the editor-in-chief over at Pride of Detroit. With me, as always, for First Bite is senior editor of Pride of Detroit, Ryan Matthews, at Ryan_POD on Twitter. Ryan, how we doing, buddy?
I am doing well. I'm staying grounded, even though the winds are high in Michigan.
Yes.
Our flag is flying high today because we have an incredible guest.
Yes, and crossing our fingers that the power does not go out during the middle of this recording. Let's get straight into our guest. You may know him as a staff writer for The Ringer, writing about the NFL, the draft, fantasy football. He's a co-host of the Ringer's fantasy football show. Danny Kelly is here, at Danny B. Kelly on Twitter. Danny, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. For those who don't know, I also used to run Field Goals, the SB Nation blog.
That's right. He's part of the SB Nation alum, which we always appreciate around here, and always, a nice, kind of like a guy to aspire to be a little bit, that we can springboard this into something bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's.
Yeah. It was a good opportunity. Yeah.
Exactly. Let's get right into the draft talk, and I want to start off with a bit of a philosophical question because Lions fans have been hearing for the past couple months that this is a bad year to have a top 5 pick. There aren't elite talents. There's no elite quarterback. Each edge rusher comes with a question or two. So my question to you is, given the position the Lions are in, the rebuilding, is it smarter to go with a player that you're maybe more confident about working out, even if it comes at the expense of positional value? Or is it, since everyone has questions, just throw your dart at the guy that has the highest positional value so that you have the bigger upside there?
That's so tough. It's impossible to answer, of course, because we don't know exactly who these guys are going to turn into. But I would say generally just take the best player. Especially in this class, I don't think you really need to worry too much about positional value. This is a team that just needs good players and needs blue chip players. So don't worry too much about exactly where they got them in the draft. I do think that there are long-term cap implications if, you're paying for instance, safety, top of market money. I guess that has long-term value, but I think at the end of the day, they just need good play. They need good players. The Lions need to rebuild something. They need people who are going to come in and continue to change the culture. I think that's a big part of why I think people are excited about the Lions, is because Dan Campbell seems to have done exactly that, change the culture, turned it into a confident group that plays really hard for him and all that stuff. I think that's, it is a cliche, but it is important in the NFL.
Right.
These are human beings playing the game. So, if you think a guy who is, for instance, just, Kyle Hamilton, if you think he's going to be that guy, I personally wouldn't sweat it too much in terms of the positional value. The freaking cap is going to keep going up. The NFL is not getting any less popular, and I think safeties honestly are becoming. And Ben Solak from The Ringer actually said this in an article recently. The safety position, the salaries are increasing at a rate that we haven't seen in a long time, and relative to other positions. The NFL, I believe, is coming around to the idea that safeties are super important. And I think this is something that football nerds have been saying for years, but for whatever reason, the NFL hasn't been on board with that. But safety play, you can really do a lot. With a good safety, take away the middle of the field. How is that not important?
Right.
So, yeah, I think, that's generally where I am coming from here. But I think at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of good players, and there will be a good pass rusher at that spot if you want to go that way. And there's going to be really good tackles at a spot if you want to go that way. So they have a lot of options. And to me, it doesn't seem like there's it's not a bad class to have a good pick in, a high pick in, because there's going to be good players there.
So I want to ask you, Danny, because your latest mock draft that you just updated over on the Ringer, you have Aiden Hutchinson going number 1. He was going number 1 in your past mock drafts as well. You have Thibodeaux going to the Lions at number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Do we think that we've all just come to this consensus on Aiden Hutchinson being that number 1 pick? Because like you said, he's kind of the safest guy. He's the safest edge rusher of the 3.
Yeah, I think what you're getting with him. He's productive, super athletic. From everything we've heard, really hard worker, loves ball. He kind of checks all those boxes. I don't have a lot of fear that I'm for instance, he's the number one guy on my big board now. I ended up switching him in Thibodeau because I'm like, in 5 years, I don't have that much fear that he's going to be a bad player. Like, he'll still be a good quality, productive player. I don't know if he's going to be the superstar in the league because like you guys had alluded to, like, it's maybe just not that type of class where you're going to have like a JJ Watt or whoever, Aaron Donald type player. But I think he's going to come in and he'll play well and he'll be productive, and you don't have to worry about him too much. Kind of like that's the deal. And when you're picking in the top 10, like, you don't want to miss. Like, that would be the worst thing you could do
Right.
because not only are you paying this person a lot of money, the opportunity cost is massive, and it sets you back, and potentially like you could have more turnover in the front office because of all that. So there's just a lot of things hinging on kind of getting that pick right. So take a safe guy. Like, I know that's sort of like the coward's way of doing it, but like it makes a lot of sense, honestly, for both the team and the front office. So yeah, to me, he's just the safest pick. I still think Thibodeau has the highest upside, but there's definitely some disagreement, I'd say, about that, and from the different analysts, and like a lot of reasonable, smart people have different opinions on that. It's just kind of that's how scouting works. It's tough. You never really know how these guys are going to develop.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Dan Campbell recently had a comment that I thought was very telling, where he said, positional value, we're not really concerned with the perceived value of these guys. We just want a guy that we're sure 5 years down the line he's going to be a foundational player for our team. And so that I think that speaks to maybe going for the safer pick. Now, let's move to beyond Aiden Hutchinson and talk about the next debate, which is really heated up in the last month or two, which is Travon Walker or Kayvon Thibodeau. And you took Thibodeau in your mock. Why'd you go that way? And do you think it's a better fit for the Lions? Is it a bigger? Which one is the bigger risk? Because I feel like both have pretty serious question marks.
I know, like I don't know how to answer that. They're both risky.
Yeah,
it's a tough question. Yeah.
By the way, there's also this chance apparently that Walker could be the first pick. So like maybe you don't even have to have this argument for the last like 6 months, like
because I think everyone agrees that Aiden Hutchinson and Dan Campbell is just like a marriage,
two peas in a pod right there.
Yeah. And there's a lot of momentum behind Aiden Hutchinson, obviously, just because of the Michigan player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So say that doesn't happen though. Say like Hutchinson goes number one, which seems like the most likely thing, but I feel like there's some question there that's going to happen. But I think like with Thibodeau, like if you look at things like pressure rate, he did have, I believe, one more sack, which is not a lot because sacks are pretty high variance stat in general. But like his pressure rate was better. I think he's been asked to do like pure pass rushing stuff more. Like with Walker, it's projection because he's a extremely good athlete. He is built like you would design a pass rusher in a lab. Like he has all the traits that you look for. But there's also plays on tape where you're like, okay, this guy doesn't really know what he's doing yet. And he doesn't maybe have like the same kind of like bend and agility. Cause that's the other thing is like, I think Thibodeau has pretty good bend. Like I see him dip and rip into the pocket. Like, the ways that he can beat a tackle to the edge. I'm like, this guy's really good. But of course there is some question of whether he has enough bend or he's elite bend or who knows, like, how it works out in the NFL. Does he have ankle flexion? Like, to me, that stuff is very hard to like figure out. Like, that's a very subjective thing, and I thought he had it, but maybe the NFL doesn't believe that. So, at the end of the day, I think they're both pretty risky, honestly. Thibodeau, I think the thing is, a lot of teams are sort of wondering. This is what we're hearing. These are the reports. I'm tired of like saying it, but like there's enough smoke here that teams don't really like his personality or the fact that he has all these off-field interests. Teams want guys who are like hardcore football meatheads. All they want to do is play football and talk about football. They go home and play football on video games, blah, blah, blah. Whereas Thibodeau has all these other interests. He's into business. He's into crypto. He got a deal with Nike. He's thinking about life after football. You can argue whether that matters. I think you could argue that it doesn't matter. It's actually a good thing because he's super mature.
Right.
But some teams would be like, look, we just want a guy who doesn't care about anything but football.
Just robot.
So I think, with both guys, very high upside, but I think with both, there's some risk because, especially with Walker in particular, so we haven't really seen him play that role of like just a pure pass rusher. He's been asked to do a lot of stuff in college with the Georgia defense where, he's heads up on a tackle. He's basically trying to open up areas for the blitz or like gaps for the blitz and do other things. He's not like just on the edge, pinning his ears back, trying to get to the quarterback. So his numbers weren't as good, frankly. Like they just weren't as good. So that's, I think, the concern. But, again, the draft is not picking guys that were good like last year. It's trying to find the guys that are going to be good in the NFL. So that's, of course, an art form.
For sure. And most recently, I think it generates lots of buzz just because it's ESPN and it's Mel Kiper. But in his latest mock draft, he had Sauce Gardner going number 2 to Detroit. So if you come
really?
if you come off the idea of an edge rusher, now Sauce is somebody who did have a top 30 visit with the Lions.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's them doing their due diligence on whether or not they're going to move back and maybe he'll be available, this, that, or the other thing. But it's a tough pill to swallow right now, I think, Danny, for Lions fans after taking Okudah at 3. And
what happened with that, by the way? Can you guys give me like a 5 or 10 second synopsis of what's happening there?
Injuries.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I really think so. Like even going back to his rookie season, like the core stuff that, the core surgery that he had and then coming back, and Matt Patricia's a douchebag. But then, he really got thrown in the ringer, and it was tough sledding.
Great
for him.
website, by the way.
Nice plug. Perfect.
Yeah. Way to work. But and then last year, obviously the Achilles in the first game. So I mean,
the coaching staff loves him, and
everything in training camp seemed like he was on the up and up, right, Jerry?
Right. Yeah. The coaching staff believes in him. His teammates were like, you guys missed out on what was going to be an amazing season from him. But unfortunately, an Achilles injury is like career changing potentially. So who knows where that's at.
So you can't count on it, but there's some hope there.
Yeah.
But I understand what you're saying, though. The fans probably are not like wanting another corner at top 3 pick or whatever. What was he, 3rd pick?
Okudah was 3, yeah.
Yeah.
But it kind of goes back to that conversation, right? Because Sauce Gardner is a pretty clean prospect. Like, a lot of people think he's one of the best in a few years that we've seen. So do you go with a guy that, again, you're pretty sure is going to be a really good player? Is that sound strategy to you?
I mean, look, I wouldn't hate it. I would understand why the why the fan base would probably be a little nervous about that or not want to go that direction. But like, we just got done talking about coaching staffs and teams and front offices wanting guys that are obsessed with football. Like, that's what you hear about Sauce Gardner. Like, I heard Daniel Jeremiah talking about how he doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke. All he does is talk about football. He loves ball. You hear that from the Cincinnati coaching staff. Like, this guy is all about football. Again, that's like music to a coach's ears, right? So, that's the kind of guy you want to come in and set the culture and have a potentially, franchise changing guy. And, cornerback is an important position, especially in the NFL right now, where you have all these really ridiculously good quarterbacks and ridiculously good receivers coming in the league every year. Like, having a corner who can shut down one side of the field, or at least you can trust him to play on that side of the field, and 9 times out of 10, he's going to do really well at it. That can change the way that you use your defense and deploy your defenders and schemes and all that stuff. So, like, I could certainly talk myself into that if I was a Lions fan. Like, I wouldn't be sad about it, but I do get kind of where you're coming from with the Okudah thing. And, you don't want to, like, once bitten or whatever, twice bitten, you don't want to, like, fall into that trap again. But yeah, he's a really good player.
Yeah. The last guy I want to talk about, and he's kind of slid into the conversation here late too. And they're just, it's like 5 or 10% of fans, but they are loud. And I won't say annoying because some might be in our live chat right now. But Jermaine Johnson is a guy that, again, like,
at number 2?
Yeah, okay. At 2. Like, some people think he might be the best edge rusher in the class. It's not a popular opinion, but it's there. Sure. Dave Burkett of the Detroit Free Press slotted him to the Lions at 2, and I think one of his latest mocks. So again, I think maybe it goes back to that safety. Like, it's more of a safe pick. There's not a ton of red flags with him, and another guy that loves ball. Is that too much of a stretch for you? Just because maybe he doesn't have any of those elite traits?
Yeah, it would be a reach in my opinion, but maybe teams a guy that they trade back on and get him. What was that?
I said teams reach, right? Like, I mean, like Clelin Ferrell.
Happens every year, man. It happens every year. There's always something weird at every draft, or multiple things that are weird. Yeah, the Ferrell one was a perfect example of that. Like, no one really expected him to go that high, and he was a sort of a low ceiling, high floor guy, and that's what he turned out to be in the NFL. He's not a big impact player. In fact, I don't really know if he gets that much playing time anymore. So yeah, like, I think, like, Johnson is good. He's a good player, but I would way rather have Willis. I would way rather have Walker. I don't know why they would do that. Maybe just they see more potential in him, or maybe if it's their scheme better or what, but like he does, he has some proven production. But again, he was the guy that transferred away from Georgia
Right.
to go play at Florida State for a reason. Like some people were in front of him on that depth chart. Maybe he just didn't want to play the style of ball that Walker was playing too. Like that was probably a smart decision on his part, because maybe he just wasn't going to have the opportunity to like pin his ears back and go. And turns out that was a really good decision. But I personally like those other two pass rushers better, but again, anything could happen in the NFL. It's you see weird stuff every year.
Well, I want one more question, one quick follow-up, because I want you to wax poetic about Malik Willis just for a little bit of time, because I'm kind of surprised. Like, do you feel like Seattle might pass on him at 9 if he's not there? Because you have him going number 20 to Pittsburgh. And prior to you updating your most recent mock draft, you had Malik Willis going number 2 to Detroit, which is something that I've been a huge proponent of because, like you said, if you're going to swing for the fences, you might as well swing for the fences on a guy who has the kind of upside that he has.
Yeah, and in particular with Detroit, I feel like he would be a pretty good fit, honestly. They've invested in some weaponry at the receiver position. I think getting better. They're going to continue to get better there. But like Malik Willis is a guy that you can utilize in your run game. You can change everything in your run game. Like I go back and I've compared him to Russell Wilson, early career Russell Wilson, where limited somewhat as a passer, you're not necessarily going to want him to be dropping back on third down and trying to make reads and make throws and things like that. Like that's not going to be the best position to put him in to succeed. And Russell Wilson struggled with that a little bit earlier in his career. I want to be clear though, Russell Wilson was a much better prospect than Malik Willis in terms of passing. So the big question for me is like how much runway do you want to give a quarterback like Malik Willis, who has, he's coming from an offense at a lower level, by the way, where he wasn't really asked to do multiple progression reads. He was basically like reading one guy and then taking off or trying to make something happen out of structure. So there's a lot of like, I don't know. I go back on it every like once a week. I'm like changing my mind on what I want the Seahawks to do on number 9 with regards to Willis, because I think he would be my first choice for the quarterback spot. But it is, I think, going to be a long process. His numbers, if you really just look at it like dispassionately, like he's not a good prospect as a passer at all. And so you just have to be like, there's a lot of projection there. This is a Josh Allen situation. Can that happen? Sure. And if you're going to bet on a guy, like you said, if you're going to bet on a guy, go big, go big or go home. Like this guy has elite traits. So that's what you want to bet on. Yeah. And I think in the short term, he can be Jalen Hurts-esque as a guy that you design your offense, the run game around. And he's doing read option. He's doing bootlegs. He's doing nakeds. He's doing all kinds of stuff. And he's really good at passing like deep down the sideline. And that's like, design up schemes where he's doing that. And just hopefully you won't have to put him in too many situations where he's dropping back on 3rd and 7, right. Because they're so ahead of the stakes in the ground game and all that. And you guys have good running backs, good offensive line. Like philosophically, you want to just like punch guys in the face. Like that makes sense to me. Like all this kind of you put it all together. But I think Willis in particular has a Grand Canyon, like wide range of potential outcomes in the NFL. So that's just kind of like the nerve-wracking thing. It's like, oh God, like, are we gonna like stick with this guy for 4 years? Yeah. Sure. If he's not having any real improvement as a passer, like then you're in the situation like the Eagles where like most people I don't think that Jalen Hurts is the answer there. But I thought it was pretty good last year, but NFL teams feel differently. They're certainly gearing up where they can make a move after this year to do a different quarterback. So I don't know. It's tough. I'd actually be really excited to see him land there though, because I think it would be it would be a good fit for him, and it'd be fun to kind of see the offense that they design around him, because he has that skill set that is really rare, but you just got to develop it.
Yeah. You have to imagine that'd be a really, really hard decision for a second-year general manager to make in the early part of a rebuild, but bring a lot of excitement. Initially, I think there'd be a lot of blowback based on what Lions fans.
Yeah, how do the fans? How do fans feel about this? Like, or is it pretty split?
It's not that split. I would say it's like 90-10. Don't want him.
Don't want it.
Because they're doing the thing that every fan does, which is like, oh, we'll just get one next year. Which, of course, is much, much easier said than done.
Sure, and the next year, maybe this class will be viewed differently.
Right, Yes, that's another thing.
So yeah,
at one point, Brad Kaya was considered the number one prospect a year ahead of time, and then
I mean, look, Sam Howell and I'm blanking on the name, the Oklahoma guy, the Oklahoma quarterback who actually
Spencer Rattler.
Right, Rattler.
Yeah.
Like if back at this year or back at this time last year, people were really excited about Howell and Rattler, and we saw what happened there. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's one of those things that's this is what happens every year, honestly.
Yeah.
But I think that the NFL has told us with the way that they've treated the free agency period, they've treated sort of like every team out there now has a bridge quarterback. Like you guys have Goff, like you can survive another year with
Right.
Goff. The Seahawks went and got Drew Lock. Fun times. Signed Gino. Yeah, Gino.
yeah, that just happened, right?
But like this is like I think the NFL has kind of told us that they don't love this draft class at quarterback. And so whether that's right or wrong, we'll end up finding out. But it's so tough to know what's
It's a
happen
tricky decision, and one that the Lions certainly could kick down the road. But we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to dive into the later picks, 32 and beyond for the Detroit Lions. We're here with Danny Kelly from The Ringer. Stick with us. We'll be right back. All right, just for a live audience, we're going to jump right into our second segment here instead of take a little break. So give me a second, and we'll jump right back. And we are back here on First Bite with Danny Kelly, staff writer for The Ringer, NFL draft expert. Let's talk later in the draft. Lions got the 32nd pick overall. I think in a weird way, Lions fans are almost more excited for these picks because it does seem like there's a dearth of talent there, and specifically at positions of need, safety, linebacker, wide receiver potentially, depending on how big of a run there is there towards the end of that round. So I guess let's start with your pick in your mock draft. You went Christian Watson with the Lions at 32, which I think is a name that's been rising up. Some think he might not even be there, but really raw kid. Tell me what you like about him.
I mean, like you said, the athletic traits, he's raw, but the athletic traits are rare. This is the same sort of discussion we were having about Willis. It's like you can't find very many guys that have 4.3 speed or his size. His agility, the way that they utilize him in the offense, as like basically motioning him into the backfield as a running back, jet sweeps. He's also pretty good deep down the field. Like obviously take the top off the defense speed downfield. I've soured on like the idea that he'll go in the first round a little bit. I think over the last like few days, just kind of like trying to read the tea leaves of what everyone's talking about, what the rumors are and all that, but. He's another guy I just felt like would fit the personality of the Lions, like what they're trying to build too. Like, he's not afraid to block. He's not afraid to do the dirty work as a receiver. He's coming from North Dakota State where they're like extremely run heavy team. And he's asked to do a lot of sort of like the dirty work at receiver. And I think that's something that would endear him to Dan Campbell. So, I mean, like fit wise, I think it makes a lot of sense. Plus they just went and signed DJ Chark to a 1-year deal, which would indicate they don't have like a long-term commitment to him. If he does play really well, maybe they'll sign him to a multi-year deal, but Christian Watson could come in and sort of play the DJ Chark role in year 2 and have some continuity there in their offense. And so those are the things I was thinking about, but I don't know, to be honest, I think he might fall a little bit further than this. We'll see. It's tough to know because the other thing is like philosophically in the NFL now with all these huge, massive receiver contracts, there could be a run on receivers early. Yeah. And so maybe he does make it in the first round.
Yeah, to get that 5th-year option, right?
Yeah. So, because I think over 4 years, like first round receiver is going to make like $13 or $14 million versus like $30 million a year. I think that's like a factor that you kind of have to consider here. But I think Watson, like as a prospect, he's really intriguing, but he also has a lot of sort of concerns because he's lower level competition, some drops. He's not as maybe tough at the catch point as you want from a guy his size. His frame is pretty skinny. Maybe he adds a little bit of weight and he's like turns into a Chase Claypool style guy. But overall, like you want to bet on that kind of athleticism, I think.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, there might be that earlier run on wide receiver, but I think 32 is a really popular spot for receiver just for a lot of the reasons you just mentioned, But But what you said about DJ Shark being a 1-year deal, like the Lions are basically building a roster on 1-year, 2-year deals.
Yeah.
And Brad Holmes is keeping he's keeping it very open. He's keeping the opportunity for things to happen. And Jeremy keeps on saying this every podcast, but like a lot of these signings are contingency plans. And if they work out, great. Charles Harris will bring you back. Tracy Walker will bring you back. But, for every Charles Harris, there's Tyrell Williams, and for every Charles Harris, there's, Brashad Perryman. So there's a lot of these things that just don't end up working out. But to switch gears and move to another position, I want to talk about the safety class, because safety is obviously a position. We talked about Kyle Hamilton and him potentially being the number 2 pick. Again, the Lions bring in Deshaun Elliott on a 1-year deal, like a 1-year prove it deal.
Yeah.
So that doesn't take safety off the board for Detroit at all whatsoever. And especially with, how you mentioned safety becoming such an important position. Really, you just have like Kyle Hamilton and Dax Hill going in the first round. Lewis Cine is a popular name, Jaquan Brisker. Do you think that might be a little bit too rich at that point to take a guy like either of those at 32 or 34? Or
no, not really.
Totally in play?
That was the other thing I think I've seen sort of the winds and the rumors right now is there could be a run on safeties too in this class, like Jalen Petre from Baylor. Like you said, Lewis Cine. I think Lewis Cine could be a first rounder. I don't think it would be a reach really to take him here. I've got him at 65. I got to move him up. Like, I feel like that's way too low. This is like one of those things
with the Lions today, actually.
Yeah, you look at sometimes you just look at your ranks. I'm like, what am I thinking? I got to get him higher. But yeah, like the way that, again, like safeties in the modern game, especially in 2 highs where you can like change up the coverages, it's really important to have guys that can kind of cross train, I don't know if cross train is the right word, but like play multiple roles in an offense where you can basically rotate him to anywhere in the offense on any given play. It's really confusing for the quarterback. If you have a guy who's like only can play in the box, like quarterback knows exactly where he's going to be on every snap. And that makes things more predictable for a defense. So like guys like Brisker, Cine, I think are all, both of those guys are pretty versatile, able to play all over the defense. They're both really athletic. Cine is like a freak athlete. So he would make a ton of sense, I think, early in the second. In fact, he might go in the first round. So he's make a note. I got to move him up. Like that's like the first note I'm making on that based on this podcast. But yeah, he's a really fun guy. Like long. He's not as like big as some safeties, I think, in historically, but maybe that's fine because it just makes him. He's a little bit more rangy. He's like explosive, clearly, and can run with like tight ends down the seam. He can line up in the slot sometimes, so he can just do a little bit of everything for you.
Before we jump into linebacker, I feel like I have to dip a little bit back into quarterback talk because, at least nationally speaking, 32 seems to be a pretty popular spot for the Lions to land a quarterback. Or, in my opinion, I think seems like a better opportunity to maybe trade out of that spot for someone that's quarterback hungry, wants that 5th-year option, all that sort of stuff. Maybe Ritter is a popular guy, although he seems to be rising up boards, might not be there at 32. My philosophy is if he's not good enough for 2, I don't really see the play at 32. But I'm curious as to what your philosophical, I guess, idea is if the Lions with quarterback here.
I think like in general, that's the right thing. Like that's the right way to look at it. Like if you're not going to take him at 2, like why would you take him at 32? If do you not believe in him or like? But at the same time, these guys, GMs, are paid to get the most value out of their picks. What they do in the months up to the draft, leading up to the draft, they have basically like, like CIA level, FBI level, like, spy operations, trying to figure out what teams are going to do, where they're going to go. They have people studying mock drafts. Like they're trying to get a grip on what other teams are doing so they can get the absolute most bang out of their buck at every pick. You saw I know this is an outlier and this is probably a unique situation, but even the Ravens picked a freaking tight end before they traded back up for Lamar Jackson. Like,
Hayden Hurst.
He was the MVP. And he was they traded back up into the first round. They took a tight end first. And maybe that was just because they had a really strong idea that no one else was going to take him before when they were going to trade back up or whatever. Like, and I've heard, coming up and studying the Seahawks closely, like John Schneider's talked about it multiple times. Like they put in a lot of work trying to figure out where guys are going to go in the draft and exactly where they can take them. They talked about this incessantly after taking Russell Wilson. Of course, Russell Wilson turned out okay or turned out really great, but they obviously didn't take him till the third round. John Schneider was obsessed with Russell Wilson, and they happened to get Bobby Wagner before they picked Russell Wilson, Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
So on one level, I totally agree with you. Like, if you're not willing to take him at 2, like, you must not like him enough. But I think it's also like their job to get all the bang for their buck. If they can get both, Kayvon Thibodeaux and a quarterback, like, that's better, honestly.
That's fair.
So I think that's the way they look at it. Of course, that's really risky.
Yeah.
You might not have it go your way.
Yeah. So is there a guy? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember at one point you had Desmond Ridder at 32. Do you think that that's a guy that is moving a little bit into earlier first round territory? Because right now you just have 2 guys. You have Pickett, I think, at 6, and then you have Malik going 20. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it seems like over the last week or two, this is the time of year where everything is smoke screens, and so it's like really hard to figure out what's happening. But the reports you're seeing from big reporters that are really plugged in is that the NFL seems to like Ridder more than I think the consensus or the narrative is right now. Like, a lot of people see him as like a late first or second round type guy, and I think the NFL sees him as like mid first type guy. So it does seem like he's, quote unquote, rising, but like, I think, maybe he's just been there for teams all along. Plus, it sounds like, and I heard Daniel Jeremiah say this, it sounds like he's just absolutely aced all the interviews in the pre-draft process, which is, of course, really important for coaches and teams. You're trusting the future of your job to this guy to be able to pick up the offense that you want him to do, to be able to learn, be able to develop, be able to, communicate what you want to the team and be the leader of the team. It sounds like Ridder has all the traits in terms of the intangibles that teams are wanting, which is, I think, actually underratedly important. Like, people talk about it being cliche, but like, you need someone that's going to go in there and command the huddle, know how to like run the offense and make decisions and be the leader. You can't really have a guy who's just sort of aloof and doesn't really know what he's doing. Cause then
you end up with Carson Wentz.
Yeah. Like, a great example, really great example. Like, he just doesn't have that, intangible leadership. It sounds like the teammates just didn't really like him. Like, that's not the guy you want running your team.
Right.
And so it sounds like Ridder has really aced all that stuff. He's a smart guy. He's mature. He has a kid. I always say that. It's kind of a joke, but like, my life changed when I had a kid, and I'm more mature now that I have a kid. I care more about my career now that I have a kid. So maybe that's just something to keep in mind. But I think, I think that's sort of the smoke right now, is that he's aced all those pre-draft things and been really good, really impressive. So is Willis, by the way. From everything that I've heard.
Yeah. So, you could see it down there at the Senior Bowl. He was just commanding everybody on the field.
It's important, and you not to keep bringing up Russell Wilson and the Seahawks, but like, I remember when he got drafted, he was a 3rd rounder. He came in and he ran their rookie camp. This is like, they bring in like a 90-guy roster of like mostly rookies and like undrafted guys and some free agents and all that. And he, after like, this is like 2 weeks after the draft or something, he came in and he knew the entire offense. He ran the camp. Like, the coaches weren't running it. He was running it. And I'm like, to me, that's just like the perfect microcosm of what teams want at quarterback. That's the reason he won the job as a rookie, even though they had signed Matt Flynn to this big contract, because he could do that shit. So sorry if I don't know. If
You're totally fine. Yes.
Okay.
Green.
So
I called
that to me, the FCC's not coming down on us right now. Okay. To me, that's like, again, I keep going back to Russell Wilson, but that's like what I, came up in covering the Seahawks, and like, that's so important for the quarterback. It's something that, people know, I think, implicitly, but like, it's something that coaches, I think, value more than the average fan, because like, they have to actually deal with these guys and teach them and get them to run their offense and run their meetings and essentially be a part of it's an extension of the coaching staff.
Yeah.
The quarterback is an extension of the coaching staff. So their management, it's just interesting. So I think that's important.
Last position, a couple players I want to talk about. Linebacker, again, a popular pick for the Lions at 32, 34, maybe even 66. Nakobe Dean is probably the one that Lions fans are circling the most. Interesting prospect because he's undersized, and that scares off some people. But the Lions are kind of in a new era of linebacker where they don't need them to be 260 pounds and run like lightning. Those, the 1 or 2 players that exist like that. Right. So what are your thoughts on Nakobe Dean? Do you think he's fine in today's NFL?
I think it just depends, and it's interesting to hear your perspective on it because, to be honest, I don't know like the Lions' defensive scheme as well as you guys do. If you guys think he would be a fit, I think that makes a ton of sense for them there. If he's there at 34, like, he might be there at 34.
Yeah.
It's sounding more and more like some teams will push him down their board because he's sub 6 foot, sub 230. Like that, generally speaking, is like not the prototype they're looking for, especially in a first round pick. He's an extremely good player. He flies to the football. He's a spark plug for the entire team. Like you can see it on the field, like the teammates, he's the alpha guy on the defense. And that's a freaking defense too. Like this is a historic, ridiculous, absurd, like made up.
Great point.
Like a freaking video game defense. Like the guys on this defense are insane. They have another top 5 guy next year coming out. And they have like, this is maybe the most athletic defense ever constructed in college football. So the fact that he was like the leader and like the guy that everyone rallied around, I think says a lot. But I think the NFL at the end of the day probably would like Quay Walker more because he's long, he's versatile, he can play in multiple different schemes, he can wear different hats in the defense. I think you're kind of more pigeonholed with what you can do with Dean. But that's not to say I think he's a bad player. I think it's like the Tyler Linderbaum question, like really good player, extremely good player, but he lacks length. And he's going to be a scheme-specific guy that could make him fall a little bit. You only have so many people like chasing after a guy like that. So I think there's a solid chance Dean falls out of the first round. If not, he's going to be there at 32. And so that would make a lot of sense too. And it's like, again, culture guy, like foundation building guy. I could see that happening for sure.
Well, Danny, this is totally a safe space. And you know that as Detroit Lions fans, we went through something very similar that you're going through this offseason as Seahawks fan yourself.
If Russell Wilson wins the Super Bowl this year, then we'll be on level playing ground. I still feel like you guys got a little bit of an edge here, but yes.
Yeah, so it's an interesting perspective because I think a lot of Lions fans were happy to see Matthew Stafford go off and have success, even if it was the ultimate success that he was supposed to have here.
Right.
But there are some that are very, very bitter, and they say that they don't care about what he does in Los Angeles, but they really do care. So, okay. I'm kind of just interested in like, what were your kind of reactions to the Russell Wilson trade, and like, how are you feeling about your team kind of just being in a similar territory, like you said, the Lions are kind of at with Jared Goff, and Seahawks have Drew Lock, and it's a bridge to a new era.
It is. It's from my analytical mind, because I came up in my career covering the Seahawks. Like basically they drafted Russell Wilson 1 year after I took over the Field Goals blog. And so I got to do the whole Russell Wilson era in like real time. It was like so awesome. And it's like the analytical part of me kind of feels nostalgia for like the Seahawks next phase. It's like, oh, this is fun because they're going to bring in all these different quarterbacks. They're going to bring in all these different guys, try and rebuild their defense, rebuild the Legion of Boom, which was so fun to cover and so fun to study. So to be totally honest with you, like I found myself being fascinated. I'm sure once games start, I'm going to be like, this fucking sucks. Why are we watching this? But like, Seahawks games in general, like, I don't know if you guys understand, like, Seahawks fans mindset, but like Seahawks games are impossible to watch. They suck to watch. Like they end up winning most of them, but like it's painful. This is the ugliest game, the most frustrating strategies. Like
I know the tweet meme of there's never a normal Seahawks game.
Yes, like if they get even a hint of a lead, they take their foot off the gas. They want the game to go down to the final drive every freaking game. And
then they punch the ball out of Calvin Johnson's hands on the goal line.
Oh my gosh, yes, I forgot about that.
No, we haven't.
We didn't.
Was that Cam Chancellor?
I believe it was.
Or was yeah. That was a hell of a play, by the way.
It was. That bastard.
But yeah, like I think to me, like to be totally honest, and this is not me just like bargaining or being in one of the phases of whatever it's called, like, grief. Yeah. I really do think it's kind of fascinating. However, I think I've already accepted into my heart the fact that they're not going to be any good for like a couple of years here, and so maybe that's just like part of it. And like I'm just kind of interested to see how they rebuild. They have a lot of picks. They have a lot of money to spend in the cap. They've made I thought that their offseason has been pretty good. There's certainly a few like weird out of left field moves, like re-signing Will Dissly to this like big deal. Like I don't really understand that one, but for the most part, I think that their roster, they've done a lot of what you guys were talking about, like hedging at certain positions, so they're not like pigeonholed into doing any one thing in the draft. And so, yeah, I'm kind of droning on now, but like, it's just going to be kind of interesting to see how they do everything. Sundays are still going to suck, though.
Welcome to the club, Danny.
They're going to be bad. They're going to be bad. I'll acknowledge that. Drew Lock, I don't think is very good, so that's probably not going to work out. But maybe in the 2023 draft. I mean, we're in the same boat as you guys.
Yeah, there you go.
Maybe in the 2023 draft, they'll get somebody good.
All right, that's Danny Kelly. You can follow him at Danny B. Kelly. Follow all of his stuff on The Ringer. Anything else you want to plug that Lions fans might be interested in terms of draft coverage?
Yeah, just the Ringer draft guide at The Ringer. So it's the NFLdraft.theringer.com, and then the Ringer Fantasy Football Show. And then in the offseason, once the draft is over, we go back to the Ringer Fantasy Football Show. So if you like fantasy, follow that. And Danny B. Kelly on Twitter. Perfect.
Danny, appreciate the time, man.
Thanks, guys.
And appreciate you all for listening. We will be back on Monday night with our main POD cast. But until then, thanks for joining us. It's Chaos. Be kind.